Welcome to the JMark Business Innovation Technology Experience.
In today's episode, we are going to talk about budgeting for technology and success in 2021. Here are a few of the main points. Agility. So technology is the innovation that's going to allow you to be agile. Security. You have to build security measures into your budget because of the continued increase in security risks. And then look beyond the numbers in the spreadsheet. At the end of the day, it comes down to value versus cost. You need to look at the real-world impact of things like an hour of downtime, employee turnover, and even a security breach. Okay, let's get started.
Okay, welcome everybody again for the JMark Business Innovation Technology Experience. And we have our own famous or infamous Kristin Dunn that has worn multiple hats at JMark and has a lot of experience with the topic at hand, which is budgeting for technology and business success in 2021. We are at the end of 2020 here, and we have gone through quite a interesting calendar year with natural disasters and upheaval and pandemics and everything else, and that has caused a lot of businesses to struggle, unfortunately. But with proper budgeting, some of that can be prevented, and so that's the point of today's discussion. And so we've talked a lot about this in the past. Just with the distributed workforce and with everything changing so much, that there are different needs to be agile and be successful in the coming year. We've seen this huge shift towards remote work. The last metric that we've talked about, because you can't really get any higher, is that 99% of remote workers would like to stay working remote for some of the time. And that's a big shift potentially in how you service your customers and how you lead your employees. And so, Kristin, with that in mind, what are some of the things that business leaders need to keep in mind as they're planning for a different year that will hopefully be better and more successful for them?
Yeah, Todd, like you mentioned, this year has definitely been the ultimate accelerant for changing how we work. So with that said, I know this year has definitely probably made people look a little bit harder at how they budget or change how they budget. But the reality is you still have to budget, and you definitely need to make sure that in that budget, you're capturing everything that needs to be accounted for, especially IT. The truth of the matter is that, maybe this year you had to put a spending freeze on some of the initiatives that you had slated, but the reality is tech debt doesn't go away. It's still there, and it's just going to continue to perpetuate if you're not strategically planning how to address those in 2021.
I think the big thing that comes to my mind, and a lot of the stuff I've been reading lately and researching, is you have to be agile in the coming year. We've been forced to be agile in 2020, where a lot of people weren't ready for it. Well, now we have the opportunity to actually be a little bit more prepared for whatever might come our way. And we don't want to promote this idea of fear. You just have to be prepared for the worst, and you'll never know when you're going to be hit by a tornado or a flood or who knows what. But the point is that we don't know what the future holds. And, customer behavior is drastically shifting and changing. People are buying things in a drastically different way, and that alone in itself, it's not a natural disaster, but it's a cause for change. And when we talk about agility, the one thing that we keep coming back to over and over again is technology, because all of the change, most of the change, is somehow related to technology. It's, you're innovating with technology, you're reducing costs with technology, you're improving your collaboration and your communication and your morale and other things with technology. You're leading with technology, you're managing with technology. And if you don't have that technology foundation in place, being able to be agile in the coming year is much, much, much harder. So there's this foundation that has to be in place. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about what that foundation looks like.
Yeah. I mean, there's, depending on the business itself and what their goals are, that's going to kind of play into what kind of strategic planning and budgeting they're doing, but it still needs to be looked at. And just like with any year that ever existed before, 2020, I know you talked about how it's not a tornado or a flood, which, the sad thing is a lot of businesses plan for those things, but they don't plan for a pandemic. Now we probably all will. But it's still just the same foundational planning that you've always done. What are our business initiatives for next year? What are our goals? What are our growth plans? How can we achieve those? People really need to take that vision shift and look at how technology can support that. A lot of times I think people forget that because technology is often looked at as an expense, which it is, there's cost usually involved in changing things or implementing things. But your return on that, if you're automating certain roles or workflows, it can definitely impact your revenue creation. So your return on that can be a lot higher. Just have to look at what's out there. I know as far as spending the time that it takes to look at those type of things can be a lot. It can be a lot of time. I know a lot of our clients that we work with, they don't have a specific role within their business over IT. And if they do, they're probably wearing more than one hat, which is a lot of times why they partner with us, because we go do that legwork for them.
Yeah, I think that's one thing, Kristin, is that's this idea that you need to take the budget that you have on paper and all these different pieces of technology, and you need to look at what the real world impact of those things are on productivity and efficiency, and on the flip side, on downtime if your technology isn't working, and how that impacts not just like the real world, but that impacts the other end of your budget when those things happen. And maybe Kristin and Todd, you guys can talk to this a little bit, but about like how a business leader can figure that out and put that into like real world terms that they will understand of like what the downtime might be and what the impact on their business is when those things happen.
Well, I think that, you have to take this approach of agility again. If you're budgeting for the next year and you're looking at, Kristin, you probably will want to talk about lifecycle management, but the idea of replacing your computers. Well, can you be agile with desktop computers that are sitting under a desk? You cannot. It is not as easy to be agile with that. So what does it look like to deploy laptops to all of your organization? When COVID hit, the run on laptops was insane, and people just could not get them. And so that's an example. And then you look at, okay, if we're going to be agile with our communications, I get, we send out prospect emails and we get auto responses still to this day where people have an auto response saying I'm working from home, or where our account executives are calling people and they can't get hold of them because they don't have a phone system or a communication method that allows them to get phone calls working from anywhere. So if you look at this idea of mobility and flexibility and agility, you really need laptops, mobile computers. You need a communication system that is flexible, that allows you to use your cell phone potentially, or an app on your cell phone for business communications. And then you look at it, from the people to people perspective. How do my people work together? Are they using some application that's sitting on a server that isn't accessible in a remote environment? is the accounting department using a different application for project management or initiative management than manufacturing or some other department? And so you look at app sprawl and you're like, what can we consolidate? Which of these tools allow us to be flexible and to be mobile? And I think that is the beginning of building this foundation and beginning the beginning of getting this idea of what do I need to do to change the budget for the coming year.
I'm glad you mentioned that specific piece about app sprawl. So when you're strategically planning your IT initiatives, like taking a hard look at what you're using today and not just going along with, this is what we've used for, X amount of time. And a lot of times, people will buy an application because it solves this problem. And then a year later, they realize there's 3 other things we need this to do and it can't do it. So they add on top of it and add on top of it rather than looking for, consolidating, because then you actually get to realize savings instead of, adding expenses to your budget. Like if we can consolidate these 3 applications, we can actually save ourselves some money. So budgeting for IT isn't always adding additional expenses. Sometimes you're realizing savings just because you took a hard look at what everybody's using. Additionally, if everybody, if you have 4 or 5 different applications for communication, it's not going to be consistent communication across the board because, this group uses this and this group uses this. And then you don't have a holistic, not everybody in the company can really effectively communicate and work together well, which again goes back to the productivity piece and again goes back to your bottom line. So,
yeah. And I think that's a great topic because it's a strategic decision to stop doing something and a strategic decision to focus on something. And when you have people that are working in disparate systems, you have a lack of communication in your organization. That leads to a lack of productivity. That leads to confusion. That leads to a lack of clarity. And, making the decision that it's going to bother some people, we're not going to use this application, we're going to use this application. And also, some of these applications too, not being so willingly or willing to just throw something away, in terms of applications, because, there's a lot of applications that change often, especially with digital transformation. But also we need to associate ourselves with companies who are innovating, applications that are actually have multiple purposes. One of the things that we use a lot is Workplace by Facebook. Facebook is one of the best organizations in the world for connecting individuals. They understand what it means for people to communicate with each other and what it means to collaborate. And so that's a tool we've adopted that has replaced, I don't even know how many tools it's replaced, but it's replaced a handful. So I think that's definitely a good start there.
Kristin, I wanted to hear some stories. You mentioned earlier you have some stories. So you've gone from working with clients on their technology planning and technology budgeting. Do you have any stories of someone who we brought on who maybe hadn't really done that before, didn't have a technology budget, you worked with them and then they avoided bad situations or had great success?
I'm happy to share that. Truthfully, a lot of the clients that when they're coming in to work with us in our partnership at JMark, it's not that they don't have budgets. All of them have budgets, but it's really taking a hard look to make sure that they're getting all of their IT expenses in those budgets. And then, like we've talked about so far, making sure that, is there app consolidation there? Where can we save them money? Where do we need a life cycle manage? I know that's one of the big things that we've helped a lot of our clients work through because, nobody wants to be down and nobody wants a slow computer because it just affects their productivity. So appropriately managing the life cycle of your technology, like I mentioned earlier, tech debt, it is what it is. Any device that gets put into your environment has a lifespan. Eventually it will die or it will be unsupported. So you have to plan appropriately for replacing those. over time. So that's always been a big thing that we've helped clients with, rather than them waiting till it breaks and someone can't work that day. That's just a very basic thing that you can budget and plan for. One of my favorite ones is I had the benefit of working with a lot of our FQHCs, which are federally qualified healthcare clinics. And so they're very dependent on grant funding. So making sure that they have a solid budget in place when these grants become available so that they can meet the turnaround times and deadlines for applying for these budgets. Like, they have to know in advance, we're going to spend this much money on, or we're planning to, spend money on this IT initiative. So when those grants are available, they can turn that around very quickly because there's deadlines they have to meet to apply for those. And additionally, there's deadlines that they have to meet on spending those funds. So having a good, solid budget in place just made that so much more effective for them.
Kristin, on a little bit of the same vein, but a little bit of a different topic, is we've seen this big change in security over the last year and a big increase in threats. Can you talk a little bit about how organizations need to be budgeting to address the security concerns that they will encounter? Not if, but they will encounter.
Yeah, it's, I hate saying it, but the truth of it is that's not something that's ever going to go away. There's risk. There's bad people doing bad things out there, and the only thing you can do is make sure that you have the right security in place to make sure that you're not impacted by it, because a lot of businesses that get hit with those kinds of things, they don't recover, especially when you're talking about 2020 where business is down. Can you actually recover from a breach? And it's not just throwing in like one type of security anymore. You have to take a holistic approach to it. It's like, if you think about your home, you don't put in a security system and leave the front door unlocked. It's just how it is anymore. You have to, you really have to make sure that you're planning to cover all of the gaps when it comes to security anymore, because one little hole is all it takes. And I hate being like a fear monger, and I'm really not trying to be that way, but that's how it is anymore. It's, just having spam filtering for emails not going to cut it. Just having antivirus on your computers isn't going to cut it. And time is of absolute essence when you're talking about security, making sure that you have the right type of technology in place to catch those. So you kind of look at it on two sides of the fence. There's proactive and then there's reactive when it comes to security. You want to make sure that you have that home security system in place, but you also want to make sure that if somebody does get in, someone's getting notified. Like your alarm system sends out a notification for someone to react to it if someone does break in. It's very similar when you think about IT risk. You want to make sure it's covered on both sides.
I think you've touched upon several things, and I'm interested to hear from any of you. What are these other things that business leaders need to make sure they put into the budget? Something that we mentioned earlier was this idea of employee training, training on security. You had mentioned antivirus and anti-spam. Those are just some of the layers. There's your patch management. A lot of the vulnerabilities come through because systems aren't patched. There's these many layers of security that people need to make sure they build into their budget, and it's going to be more than in 2020 because the increase in threats is so much greater. The landscape of threats has gone from individual locations that are very secure to a distributed workforce that's all over the place, and we've seen hackers take advantage of the situation and throw out much more complex and creative strategies to try to get into systems. So when it comes back to budgeting, these things, having good backup and disaster recovery, having backup and disaster recovery that is immutable, so it's separated from your network. And what are some other things like this that line items that businesses really need to make sure they have in their budget?
Did you mention virtual private networks set up for everyone?
That's a good idea. Yeah, VPNs. We also, as part of our service, just occurred to me, we have the log monitoring. We have systems that look at the logs of firewalls and access points and servers, and they look for behavioral changes that look suspicious. And then, like you said, Kristin, they alert people, if there's something like that. You cannot have someone sitting on your network looking at every log 24 hours a day. Something like that is a necessary item to have in your tool belt. We have systems in place on our computers that detect changes in files. So it detects if there's rapid changes or movement of files, or if there's a certain type of file that's being executed. And there's content management platforms. We use some things from Cisco, that block different types of sites and different types of content from employee networks. And it's all these types of things. It's not just a single thing. Let's implement security. There's a lot of layers that have to be implemented to make sure that you can keep up with the increase in security risks.
Yeah, and I think that. Oh, go ahead, Kristin.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think the takeaway here for business leaders is not even that you need to remember all of these specific things that we've just listed out, but the takeaway is that security is very complicated. And when we talk about a multi-layered approach, this is what we're talking about, all these different pieces. And this is why it's so important to get your budget right and to plan for it, because especially no matter what else we talk about during this hour of this live broadcast, security is going to just keep getting more and more complex. And I think that's where an MSP like JMark can be so valuable in helping you plan, because we're not just helping you plan security, and you shouldn't be planning security based on what happened in 2020. You need to be planning with an eye on how this is going to continue to evolve and change, so that your budget is set for increases in security when the status quo changes. And you are ready to, kind of like you said, Todd, be agile as the reality changes. And right now I'm talking just about security. I mean that for everything, but especially for security, because security is going to become a more and more important, regardless of how vastly important it is right now. That is just going to continue on.
Yeah, one of the other items that I think gets overlooked as far as budgeting and can really, really affect companies down the road if they're not budgeted and managed for accordingly, as line of business applications, like your core application that your business runs on. I know for example, some of the manufacturing companies, a lot of them will use AutoCAD's a good example, or architect firms. Those are pretty expensive applications, and they're usually tied to specific devices. Like if you're talking about manufacturing, those devices can be super expensive to replace, like a plot printer, something like that. But they will hesitate to upgrade the applications because the cost of replacing the devices, and then it just snowballs over time. And eventually you end up in this place where the vendor won't support the application anymore. The device isn't supportable anymore. And you just have this mound of effectively non-functioning equipment or slow equipment, and people can't work. So it's one of those things, make sure that you're really looking at your line of business applications and making sure that you keep them up to date so that you can have vendor support, because there's nothing worse than nobody being able to work that day because the main application everybody depends on is broken and nobody can fix it because it's out of date.
Yeah, that goes back to what we were discussing before the show is, there's so many companies, and we've talked about this before, that say they do patch management and they don't do patch management right. They say they do monitoring, they don't do monitoring right. They say they do automation, they don't do automation right. And so it's very difficult for business owners to really look at, the services they're getting and know, am I truly protected? Am I getting my money's worth for what I'm paying? It might be better to pay more to get the right things you need for your organization to help you be successful than to save a few bucks and not be protected. And that's one of the things at JMark that we strive to for perfection in. We have a dedicated automation team. We have extensive scripts and automation that go on to different systems to help with the patch management. And we look at things strategically. So if there is a system like that where you truly cannot update it for one reason or another, there are other security mechanisms that could be put in place to help protect that system. Ignoring a system is not a strategy for IT management. And so yeah, it's a simple thing that a lot of people overlook in their budgeting.
And I think it comes again, or all the things you're saying, Todd, come back around to what Kristin is saying about looking at the things that it takes for your business, regardless of what industry you're in, from healthcare to manufacturing to, if you're a lawyer with a law practice, whatever, what it takes to run your business on a day-to-day basis. And the budget isn't just about spending them. You need to look beyond spending the money and the outlay to replace systems or keep up with things or upgrade or whatever, and look at the impact that would have when you have those downtimes. Because those downtimes go beyond the fact that you just might have people standing around one day. It goes beyond that. You're also losing money. You're losing opportunity. What is it costing you for an hour of lost work, or for a day of lost work, or for a half hour of just slower work? And all of these things, this is where, it's so important to look beyond just the budget and the numbers that are in your budget spreadsheet, and really evaluate the real world impact that those numbers have on the way your business runs.
Yeah, I think most businesses probably have a good idea of, what does it cost us if we're down for 2 hours? I think it's more on the soft cost side that makes it a little harder to determine, like, what is our real actual cost? So, you mentioned if people are standing around for 2 hours, what is the impact to your customers? They didn't get whatever you committed to giving them in the time frame they expected it. So what does that do to the relationship with those people? And then like talking about aged computers, if I walk into work every day and I can't do my job well, eventually my employee experience is going to deteriorate. I'm going to be frustrated and I might go find somewhere else to work. There's soft costs involved in hiring a new employee, training a new employee. And if that's, if that increases your turnover rate, that can be a giant multiplier. 10% turnover rate can be a big deal to your company.
Not to mention that people know, like, people talk about their frustrations at their job. And these days it goes beyond just like, after work when you're with your friends having a beer, talking about your frustrations. People talk about it on Facebook, and that spreads. And so it impacts your reputation at every level of your business, your reputation with your customers, but also with you being able to recruit and have the best workers.
I think it's one thing you said that I'm going to disagree with, Kristin, is that I think our clients know the cost of them being down, because you and the other CRMs have taken the time to walk them through those exercises. But we've had conversations with multi-billion-dollar companies, hospitality organizations that probably many of you listening have stayed at, where they have not considered what it would cost for them to be down for 1 hour. And, when we showed them, they just like, whoa, didn't understand. And I think that's, going into a little bit of a different topic, but I think this leads into it nicely, is one of the changes that's coming in 2020, 2021, which has already come in 2020, that has to be thrown into budgets, is the idea of digital transformation. What is it going to take to change our organization to, be a more digital organization, whether that's using different apps, whether that's using different kinds of systems, whether that's retiring legacy software that doesn't work in a remote environment. And it could even change the way in which we interact or even provide services to our customers. And so looking at 2021, I think it's really important, as far as a budgeting standpoint, to look at and go, where are our customers at? What do they want right now? What's different now than then? Where are our employees? What has changed in their behavior this year? What are their fears? What are their concerns? What do we need to change to address those? And I guarantee that will produce a potentially, really good conversation about the organization and about where the organization is going.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember where I heard this, but I think 2020 has definitely been the year of meeting people where they are and figuring out how to connect with people digitally. It's a big deal. It's not the same as we've got 5 people that may work remotely because they live in another state, or this person works from home. It's a lot of companies, like, their entire workforce is working remote these days. And what is that experience like for those people? And what is it like for your customers connecting with your employees? Like, how are you facilitating that really good experience? Those are hard things that need to be looked at for 2021. If there hasn't been adjustments to make sure those connections are solid, that's definitely something that needs to be focused on.
The other thing too that just occurred to me, we talked a little bit about this in the past, but when you're talking about these soft costs, one of the other things is, when you change to more of a digital environment, or you change to a distributed workforce, or you change the applications you use and centralize those, or consolidate them, that means a change in policies, a change in processes. And you can't just make budget decisions on applications, on server hardware, on services, without making budget decisions on what's it going to take to change our processes, what's it going to take to train our processes, what's it going to, what do we need to do to implement new security policies and roll those out in the organization, and what's the effort that is going to take. And though there's a lot of soft costs like that have to be considered, because you can't just have security and not have anybody trained in securing the organization. You can't just go remote without everybody understanding how they should work remotely and how they communicate and collaborate. And so there's a lot of give and take on there that has to be considered as well in the budget.
So my question to Todd and Kristin now is, I'm Christina, if you want to weigh in on this, but so we've been talking about a lot of things, and if I'm a business owner, I might start feeling a little bit overwhelmed at this point, having heard this conversation of like, holy cow, there are so many things that need to be budgeted for, and it's such an impact. Where do I even start? I believe everything that you're saying. How do I even start?
I was waiting for Kristin to respond.
I just didn't want to jump. I didn't want to jump in and step on any toes, but I still say what I said before. you're looking at different things, but you still should be focusing in the same way that you always had. What is our goals? And what are the, maybe it's the top 3 things that can deliver the most impact that you really need to focus on.
I think it goes, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, maybe it's, we mentioned employee retention. Maybe it's making sure that, your employee survey from last year, whatever negative feedback you may have gotten, maybe it's focusing on making that employee experience better and budgeting for that. Or, maybe it's figuring out how to make sure that remote experience is better for customers and employees, like how we're connecting with people. But it's whatever you determine as the biggest impact to your business, what's going to deliver the most on. And I like I said, I would recommend picking, maybe 3 top priorities. I'm sure there's going to be other things that go, kind of tier up to those goals, but pick 3 things to start with and focus on those.
The thing about budgeting is that I'm sure somebody would argue this, but it's not a science. It's very fluid. You're taking your best guesses on the future, and sometimes you're going to have to adapt and change, and your budget's going to need to be modified 3 months in or 4 months in. And I think that's important to remember, is that you're doing the best you can on the budget. You're looking at, you need these things. You've looked at the costs of various equipment or software or services that you need to implement, and you've thrown those in the budget. Maybe throw in a little bit of a margin to give yourself a safety. But when the time comes to pull the trigger on some of those things, costs could have gone up, things could have changed. And so you have to adapt and the best you can. But the way I respond to that and would encourage people to do is just start with something, create the budget and then start the initiatives the best you can. We've talked about this, last week, and, looking back at all the different things that JMark has done over the years, it's amazing to me that, we've had these initiatives that have just been like eating an elephant, just one bite at a time over many months and many quarters or many years. And eventually you get to this place and you're like, wow, that's really cool. We actually did that. And it's true that you got to be fast nowadays, and speed is the name of the game in terms of agility. But at the same time, you can't be overwhelmed into inaction. You have to look at what can you accomplish now, take one step forward, and after you take that step, you'll see the next step, and you just keep going. And it can be easy, especially for a business owner that has a trade experience in whatever it is, banking, in healthcare, in manufacturing, to really understand that there's all these other things that I have to do. But that's where other people and other partners come into play. Companies like JMark on the security side, and there's other organizations too that can help or on the IT side, and to help you to have that knowledge and to help push you forward. To actually look like you wanting to say something.
Well, I'm smiling because you there was one thing that I was sort of waiting for you guys both for either one of you to mention. And I'm glad that you did mention it. You fulfilled my faith, which is that get a technology partner that can help you create this budget. Because, Kristin, you mentioned like picking your top priorities and things are going to tier up to that. But one thing that's one thing that a good technology partner, and we certainly do this at JMark for our clients, is help you understand there might be some things that are urgent when it comes to security or equipment that is nearing the end of its life cycle, where we can help you see this needs to be a priority, because this is going to have an impact if you don't take care of this right now. It might not be on your want list, but it's on your need list. And we can help you balance those things, those 2 things apart. And a good partner, a good technology partner definitely will.
I'm glad you reminded me of that. I had one of my clients that I absolutely loved working with. They had a pretty sizable IT planning year that was coming up, and we sat down and basically she was like, you know what, can you please just help me prioritize these? This is a lot. And that's what we did. We literally sit down and basically numbered them out. Like, this is your biggest risk. You need to address this first. And I mean, that's one of the things that a good technology provider is going to do. They're going to sit down because they have that knowledge. I mean, yes, you can sit down and put everything in this budget related to IT, but you also need the knowledge base to be strategic about which initiatives need to come first and what are needs and wants. Like, what are the have tos? What do we have to do now? And you know, maybe that's something that you have to do in 2021. I mean, I know we're all super excited for 2020 to be over. Like, I'm so done with it. But the reality is just because the calendar rolls over into 2021 doesn't mean a light switch flips on and everything's back to normal. Some people are going to have to budget a little bit differently than they have in the past. So maybe you do have to leverage a partner to help you really bring that knowledge base in and say, these are all the things we know we need to do. Help us prioritize these, and how do we plan these out over, you know, maybe the next 2 years, instead of trying to do it all in 1 year like we originally had planned. We just don't have the budget for it this year. And that's okay. As long as you're planning, just don't say, I can't deal with this. You have to deal with it. Otherwise things just break and it's bad.
I think what you said about prioritization is kind of one of those oh duh moments. Is, you know, because I can look back at 2020 for JMark, and there have been times when we have had really important initiatives on the table for growth and for just different things that are happening. And looking back, there were times when those priorities were shifted mid-year or at some point in the year because of something related to compliance or security, not because we had some big threat or attack, but because we saw something coming down the road. We saw vulnerabilities, and we worked on, you know, upgrading our infrastructure, upgrading our software, just different things that are related to our compliance and security. And I think that's kind of what you got to look at with 2021. You know, you can do all these things to plan for, you know, to be agile and to be flexible. But if something kicks you in the butt on the way there, you know, a security incident, or you lose your data at an event, or some disaster wipes out your office, or something, then that's the kind of thing that just totally derails your budget, because now all of a sudden you don't have a choice in the matter. Everything comes off your budget and is associated with and is focused on this one event, this one initiative to get back to, you know, back to normal. And so, you know, when it comes to prioritization, companies need to prioritize security in their budget. They need to prioritize backup and making sure they have the right systems. They need to prioritize the things we talked about, you know, training their employees, getting their policies updated, getting their processes updating, implementing the right tools that will help them to collaborate better. But every organization is going to have to figure out, you know, what level of risk they're willing to accept, because it may be that they're willing to accept a little bit of risk just to improve the communication and collaboration in the organization. And so they reprioritize that initiative and get everybody working on that same level. And then they go back to get some of those more moderate risks.
Yeah, in my mind, I've always kind of thought of it's like a bunch of spinning plates in the air, and it's like you can't just hone in on that one, or all the other dishes are going to drop. But yes, I mean, pick the ones based on your business, like what your priorities are, what your goals are. Always consider your risk, though. You know, it may not be something that's going to really impact your bottom line directly, but mitigating risk and making sure your environment's safe and secure should always be a priority.
And not to beat a dead horse, as the saying goes, but IT is freaking complex. I mean, there are so many different areas, and technology, like we talked about, is just woven through every single part of the organization. And that's why you have to have a company like JMark that can come in and really help with the strategy, can really help with helping to understand which are the greatest risks, which are the most important strategies based on your goals, not based on our goals, based on your goals. And we've talked about this before. It's so crazy complex nowadays. The security alone is insane. And that's why, even with internal IT staff, you just can't have enough people internally that have the knowledge. And so that's why it's important to align yourself with a partner that can truly help you be successful and guide you along the way.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it earlier, about some of the different security software and applications that's out there. And I think you mentioned, like, you can't literally have somebody sitting and watching a log 24/7. I mean, you could, it's going to be expensive. So in turn, a lot of companies will look at applications to automate those things. Those applications are extremely expensive. I mean, I know because we use them at JMark. That's what we use to monitor a lot of our clients' systems. But that's also why a lot of companies will look at outsourcing security, is because they get the benefit of enterprise solutions that they probably couldn't afford just on their own to implement, plus the people with the knowledge base to support those things.
And just to add on to that too, this idea of outsourcing security needs to be taken seriously, because there are a lot of organizations out there that say they are security experts. There's a lot of managed services providers out there that say they take care of their security, and all they're doing is throwing some antivirus on your computers. So it's important to vet. Okay, Christina, take it away.
Okay, so to wrap up today's discussion, the first word I came up with is agility. So basically, technology is the innovation that's going to allow your company to be agile. And if you don't have the right technology in place, it makes it much harder. Second word is probably the word that was said more than any other word. I would bet money on that. It is security. And just everything we talked about. I mean, you have to build security measures into your budget, because at this point in time, it's not if, it's when you will get hit. And like Kristin said, it just takes one little hole somewhere for something to get through. It's just more important than ever before. And there are so many layers that have to be in place to keep up with the increase in security risks. It's very complicated. And then the last thing, I couldn't think of one simple word, but a phrase: look beyond the numbers and the spreadsheet. So this is something we talk about a lot in the podcast. It's value versus cost. Look at the real world impact. Dax mentioned, look at what an hour or even a day of downtime will cost your company. What's the cost of turnover if your employees start leaving because they're not happy with the technology? What's the cost of a security breach? So you just really need to dive in and look at these things rather than just simply looking at a number on a spreadsheet.
Awesome. Take care, everybody. Give us a call at JMark or head on over to our website if you have any questions.
Yes, check out the resources on our website if you have questions about budgets. I know there's some really good content over there. So
Thank you for attending this podcast. We hope it has been informative and helped convey that at JMark, we are people first and technology second. To learn more and discover additional content relevant to your business, please visit us online at jmark.com or at LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You may also call us at 844-44-JMark. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again.